The war's final phase did not take place among the stars or on distant worlds, but in the deepest laboratories of human science, where engineer Wu Jin had been working on humanity's most terrible creation. Wu Jin had spent his entire career studying alien biology, but nothing had prepared him for the project he was working on now. A weapon that could rewrite the genetic code of an entire species, making them unable to reproduce or even survive. The virus was unlike anything that had ever existed. In nature, it was designed with one purpose: to ensure that the vortex species would never again threaten humanity or any other civilization. The weapon was so horrifying that even the scientists who created it were afraid of what they had done. But humanity had been pushed beyond the point of mercy. General Chang Min coordinated the final offensive from a command center. Built deep inside Earth's molten core, the planet's surface was still burning from the vortex bombardment, but deep below the destruction, humanity's leaders planned their enemies' complete destruction. The general was the last surviving member of Earth's original military command. All the others had died in the bombardment or in the desperate battles that followed. Now she carried the weight of humanity's survival on her shoulders. Reports flowed in from across the galaxy. Human ships had penetrated deep into vortex space, hunting down every military installation, every colony, every ship that carried the alien genetic code. The hunters had become the hunted, and the humans showed no mercy on the bridge of the human flagship Vengeance. Captain Minho watched as another vortex world fell to human forces. The planet had been home to billions of aliens, but now it was silent and empty. The virus had done its work with terrifying efficiency. Minho felt no joy in the victory, only grim satisfaction that humanity's enemies were finally paying the price for their arrogance. He had lost his family in the bombardment of Earth, and like every other human survivor, he would not rest until every vortex was dead. Captain activated his communication system, sending a message to the fleeing vortex ships. This is Captain Minho of the United Earth Navy. You declared war on humanity thinking we were weak prey. Now you know the truth. We are the deadliest species in the galaxy, and we will hunt you to the last. The response came from Supreme Hunter Sithik himself, the once mighty alien leader, now reduced to commanding a handful of damaged ships fleeing from human pursuit. Please. The alien leader's voice was broken and desperate. We surrender. We will never threaten your species again. Just let us live, Captain. Minho's reply was cold and final. You should have thought of that before you tried to exterminate Isith. Human ships opened fire, turning the last vortex flagship into burning wreckage. Supreme Hunter Sithik died knowing that his arrogance had doomed his entire species, but the war was not over. Yet Ambassador Kang Ho stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers, but this time the mood was very different. The same aliens who had laughed at his warning now cowered in fear as he delivered humanity's final message. The human ambassador looked older than before. His hair had turned completely white, and his face was lined with the weight of what his species had done. But his voice was steady as he addressed the terrified council. The vortex threat has been eliminated, he announced, in the same calm tone he had used a year ago when warning of the consequences. Every vortex world has been pacified. Every vortex ship has been destroyed. Every member of their species has been accounted. Fourth chamber was silent. No one dared to speak as the human continued. We gave them a warning. We told them to reconsider their decision. They chose to ignore our advice and declared war on humanity. Now they have paid the ultimate price for their arrogance. The council speaker, a different one since the previous speaker had died of fear, trembled as it asked the question everyone wanted to know: what happened to them, Ambassador? Kang Ho's expression never changed. They learned what happens when you underestimate humanity. We are not just another species to be conquered. We are survivors who have clawed our way to the top of our world's food chain through intelligence, adaptability, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. He paused, letting his words sink in. The vortex made the mistake of thinking that technology and brute force were enough to defeat us. They did not understand that our greatest weapon is not our ships or our guns, but our determination to survive no matter the cost. An alien delegate found the courage to speak. What message should we take from this? The ambassador's smile was cold and terrible. The same message we tried to give the vortex. Humanity prefers peace, but we are very, very good at war. We fight not just to win, but to ensure our enemies can never threaten us again. He turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at the council. We hope this demonstration has been educational. Next time someone threatens humanity, remember what happened to the vortex and ask yourself if you really want to find out what we are capable of. As the ambassador left the chamber, the aliens sat in stunned silence. They had witnessed the complete destruction of the galaxy's most feared predators at the hands of a species they had dismissed as primitive. News of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy. Within days, every civilization learned the same lesson the vortex had paid so dearly to teach. Do not underestimate humanity. Do not threaten their survival. Do not mistake their desire for peace as weakness. The humans had not just won a war. They had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The species that had once been ignored or dismissed was now the most feared force in known space. On Earth, the survivors worked to rebuild their world, but they would never forget the lesson they had learned about themselves when pushed to the brink of extinction. Humanity had revealed its true nature, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as the ultimate survivors. The empty cities slowly filled with people again. The burned forests began to grow back. The dead oceans came back to life, but humanity itself had changed forever. They had learned what they were truly capable of, and that knowledge would shape their future among the stars. The galaxy now knew the truth about humanity. They were not just another species. They were the deadliest predators in the universe, creatures who had evolved not just to survive, but to eliminate any threat to their existence. The vortex had declared war on humanity, thinking they were hunting helpless prey. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than any hunter could ever be. They had faced the wrath of a species that refused to die and paid the ultimate price for their arrogant sin. The years that followed, no species would ever again make the mistake of underestimating humanity. The galaxy had learned its lesson, written in the ashes. 6 months into the war, Supreme Hunter Sithik made the decision that would seal his fate and the fate of his entire species. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy, he gave the order that would unleash humanity's true nature, destroy the planet. The other Vortex commanders stared at him in shock. Even for a species known for their cruelty, this was extreme. They had come to hunt humans, not to commit genocide. But Sithik had been pushed beyond reason by months of humiliating defeats. If we cannot conquer them, we will eliminate them, he snarled, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. Make their world uninhabitable. No human will survive to tell others of our defeat. The orbital bombardment began at dawn Earth time. Massive energy weapons struck the planet's surface, turning cities into glass craters. Mountain ranges were flattened, oceans boiled, and entire continents shook from the impact the vortex had brought. Enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds, and now they were using all of it against Earth. The aliens expected this show of ultimate force to finally break human resistance. Instead, they unleashed something far worse than they had ever imagined. Admiral Somin received the bombardment reports in her command bunker deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. Her weathered face showed no emotion as she read the casualty numbers, but her hands were shaking as she activated the final protocol. The message went out to every human military unit in the solar system. Every ship, every station, every hidden base received the same order. Total war authorization confirmed. No quarter, no mercy, no prisoners. The war had been about conquest and resistance. Now it was about species survival, and humans would use every weapon they had ever built or imagined. The first response came from Earth's moon. What the Vortex had thought was a simple research facility revealed itself as the most powerful weapons platform in human history. Commander Dong Hyen had spent 3 years building this secret base, disguising it as a mining operation while actually creating a fortress that could destroy entire fleets. The moon's low gravity allowed for weapons that would have been impossible to build on Earth. Massive railguns that could accelerate projectiles to incredible speeds. Energy weapons that drew power from fusion reactors buried deep in the lunar rock. Missile systems that could track and destroy targets millions of kilometers away. Commander Dong Hyen had been waiting for this moment. When the Vortex began their bombardment of Earth, he unleashed every weapon at his disposal. The moon itself became a weapon, firing a barrage of destruction that shattered 3 Vortec capital ships in the first minute, but the real surprise was waiting in deep space. Captain Haijin had been conducting long-range reconnaissance for 8 months using her stealth ship to map every Vortec facility within 100 light years. She had discovered something that changed everything: the location of the main Vortec staging area. The facility was massive, a space station the size of a small moon where the aliens kept their reserve fleet and their most important supplies. It was hidden in a nebula that interfered with most sensors, making it virtually invisible to enemy detection. Haijin knew that destroying this facility would cripple the Vortec war effort, but reaching it would be a suicide mission. The station was protected by hundreds of ships and defensive platforms. No single vessel could penetrate its defenses. She volunteered anyway along with 11 other volunteer pilots. Haijin launched the most desperate attack in human history. Their ships were modified with experimental weapons that had never been properly tested. The chances of success were almost zero, but the alternative was the extinction of humanity. The attack on the staging area began with a diversion. Human ships struck Vortec positions throughout the system, drawing away the station's defenders. While Haijin's team approached through the nebulae, the aliens detected the incoming ships too late. Haijin's team had hidden their approach by using the nebula's interference to mask their energy signatures. By the time the Vortex realized what was happening, the human ships were already inside the station's defenses. The battle was swift and terrible. Haijin's team fought their way through layers of defensive systems, each pilot knowing they would not survive the mission. Their ships were damaged and their weapons were failing, but they pressed forward toward the station's reactor core. Haijin was the last pilot alive when she reached the target. Her ship was crippled, her life support was failing, and alien fighters were closing in on her position. But she had one weapon left. She rammed her ship into the station's main reactor. The explosion could be seen from 50 light years away. The massive facility that had taken the Vortex decades to build was destroyed in seconds, along with their entire reserve fleet and the supplies needed to support their invasion. But humanity was not finished. Deep in hidden laboratory, scientists had been working on weapons that violated every treaty and moral law the galaxy had ever established. These were weapons too dangerous for any sane species to use, but humans facing extinction had moved beyond such concerns. Dr. Youngmin had developed the most terrible weapon in human history, a virus that could rewrite alien genetic code. She had spent months studying captured Vortec DNA, learning how their biology worked and how it could be destroyed. The virus was designed to be absolutely specific, targeting only Vortec genetic markers, while leaving every other species untouched. It would spread through their population like wildfire, turning their own bodies against them. Other scientists had created weapons that could destabilize stars, devices that could tear apart the fabric of space itself, and machines that could turn planets into weapons. The humans had crossed every line that separated civilization from barbarism. The galaxy watched in horror as humanity revealed the true extent of their destructive potential. Reports of human war crimes spread throughout known space, but the humans no longer cared what others thought. They were fighting for survival and would use any weapon to achieve it. The Vortex finally understood what they had awakened. They had expected to fight another civilized species that would follow the rules of war and accept defeat when it became inevitable. Instead, they had encountered something that was beyond their comprehension, a species that would rather destroy the galaxy than accept extinction. Supreme Hunter Sithik received the final reports from his surviving commanders. His invasion fleet was destroyed, his staging areas were gone, and his people were dying from weapons that should not exist. But the worst news came from home. Human ships had been spotted near the Vortec home system, moving through space like vengeful spirits. They were hunting down every Vortec facility they could find. The prey had become predators, and now they were coming for the heart of the Vortec Empire. Sithik's last transmission to his people was a warning that would echo through galactic history: avoid the humans at all costs. They are not prey, they are something far worse. They do not fight to win, they fight to ensure their enemies can never threaten them again. We have awakened the deadliest species in the galaxy, and they will not stop until we are extinct. The war had begun with the Vortex hunting humans. Now, it would end with humans hunting Vortex to the very last one the galaxy's most feared. Predators had learned too late that there was something far more dangerous than any hunter-A species with nothing left to lose. After their crushing defeat in the first battle, the Vortex changed their tactics. Completely supreme hunter Sithik had learned that humans would not fight like other species, so he decided to fight like humans using hit-and-run attacks to destroy. Human settlements, one by one, the alien fleet split into smaller groups, each one targeting a different human colony in the solar system. The Vortex used their superior speed to strike without warning, destroying everything they could find before disappearing back into space. They hit the research station on Europa first. The ice-covered moon of Jupiter had been home to 3,000 scientists, and their families. The Vortex attack ships descended from space like falling stars, their weapons turning the research domes into pools of melted metal. When the alien hunters landed to finish off any survivors, they found something unexpected. The research station was not destroyed, it was empty. The buildings were damaged, but the people were gone, and there was no sign of where they had gone. The Vortex spread out across the ice, searching for the missing humans. That was when Lieutenant Harum and her team struck. Harum had been stationed on Europa for 2 years before the war started. She knew every ice cave, every hidden passage, every dangerous crevice on the moon's surface. When the evacuation order came, she had volunteered to stay behind with a small team of soldiers. The moon's low gravity made movement different from Earth, but Harum had trained for this. Her team moved like ghosts across the ice, using the maze of natural tunnels to appear and disappear at will. The Vortex found themselves being hunted by prey that had become predators the aliens were used to hunting. On worlds with normal gravity and clear sightlines, Europa's environment was alien to them, but it was home to the humans. The low gravity that made the Vortex clumsy made the humans faster and more agile. Haram's team used every advantage they could find. They collapsed ice tunnels to trap alien hunters. They used the moon's geysers to create fog that hid their movements. They turned the frozen landscape into a battlefield where humans held every advantage. The Vortex, who had come to Europa expecting an easy victory, found themselves fighting for their lives in a frozen hell where death could come from any direction. On Mars, the situation was even worse, for the aliens. Commander Tejo had been preparing for this moment since the day the Vortex declared war. Mars was a harsh world where humans had learned to survive in conditions that would kill most species. The red planet's dust storms, underground tunnels, and extreme temperatures were perfect for guerrilla warfare. When the Vortex raiders landed near the main colony, they found it abandoned like all the other human settlements. But Commander Tejo had not evacuated. He had gone underground, taking his fighters into the vast tunnel network that connected every human settlement on Mars. The aliens followed, thinking they could corner the humans in the tunnels. Instead, they found themselves lost in a maze that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The humans had been digging these tunnels for 50 years, and they knew every passage, every shortcut, every dead end. Tejo's fighters struck without warning, using the tunnel system to appear behind enemy lines, hit hard, and disappear before the aliens could respond. The Vortex found themselves chasing ghosts through an underground labyrinth where every turn could be their last. The dust storms that regularly swept across Mars became weapons in human hands. The aliens relied on their advanced sensors to track enemies, but the storms created interference that made their technology useless. Meanwhile, the humans used simple methods like sound and touch to navigate in the darkness. In the asteroid belt, the war became even more nightmarish, for the Vortex miner Kyung-soo had spent 30 years working in the belt, learning every rock, every hiding place, every dangerous passage between the floating mountains of stone. When the war started, he had volunteered to stay behind and fight, using his knowledge of the belt to harass alien supply lines. The Vortex needed to move supplies through the asteroid belt to support their scattered forces, but every convoy that entered the belt came under attack. Kyung-soo used modified mining equipment to destroy alien ships, turning industrial tools into weapons of war. The mining charges that had once broken apart asteroids now punched holes in alien hulls. The huge machines that had moved rocks now threw them at enemy ships with devastating accuracy. The belt that had been humanity's source of raw materials became a graveyard for Vortex vessels, but The most disturbing development for the aliens was the psychological warfare. Dr. Yunji had been a psychiatrist before the war, studying how different species thought and behaved when the vortex attacked. She had volunteered to help the military understand their enemies. She spent months studying captured vortex communications, learning how their minds worked. The aliens were pack hunters who relied on fear and intimidation to break their enemies' will to fight. They had never encountered a species that refused to be intimidated or broken. When faced with humans who fought harder, the more desperate they became, the vortex began to lose confidence. Dr. Yunji designed psychological attacks that targeted the aliens' weaknesses. Human fighters began using vortex hunting calls to confuse and disorient their enemies. Empty settlements were left with recordings of human voices that made the aliens think they were walking into traps. The worst part was the humans' refusal to surrender or retreat. Every other species the vortex had conquered had eventually given up when defeat became obvious. But humans seemed to get stronger when they were losing. They turned every defeat into a learning experience, every loss into motivation for revenge. Reports began reaching the vortex homeworld, describing impossible human behavior. Soldiers who chose to die rather than surrender, civilians who destroyed their own cities rather than let aliens occupy them, commanders who turned disasters into strategic advantages. The galaxy's most feared predators were learning what it meant to be afraid on. The Vortex flagship Supreme Hunter Sifik studied the battle reports with growing alarm. His forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should have been helpless. His warriors were reporting nightmares about fighting humans who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The humans had done something no other species had ever accomplished. They had turned the Vortex's own tactics against them. The aliens who had built their reputation on being unstoppable hunters were now being hunted by prey that had learned to become predators. Sithik's advisors were beginning to suggest retreat, but the Supreme Hunter knew that would be impossible. The other Vortex clans would never accept defeat by a species they had dismissed as primitive. If he retreated now, his own people would destroy him. But staying meant facing an enemy that was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans were not just fighting to win, they were fighting to survive, and that made them infinitely more dangerous than any foe the Vortex had ever faced. They would use any weapon, accept any sacrifice, and break any rule to protect their species. As the war entered its fourth month, the Vortex were beginning to understand a terrible truth. They had not come to hunt helpless prey. They had declared war on the deadliest species in the galaxy, and now that species was hunting them. The question was no longer whether the humans would surrender. The question was whether any Vortex would survive long enough to regret their decision to attack Earth. The Vortex invasion fleet arrived exactly 1 year after their declaration, blocking out the sun with their massive black warships. Commander Han Wu watched from his hidden observation post on the moon as hundreds of alien vessels took positions around Earth. The ships were enormous, each one the size of a city, with weapons that could destroy continents. Wu was a veteran of 3 wars and had never seen anything like this armada. The largest ship was Supreme Hunter Sithek's flagship, a monster of metal and death that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. Its hull was covered in spikes and battle scars from 1,000 conquered worlds. The commander activated his communication system, connecting to every human military unit in the solar system. His voice was calm and steady as he delivered the message that would start the war. All units, this is Command Central. The enemy has arrived. Execute Operation Prometheus. Repeat, execute Operation Prometheus on Earth. The cities that had bustled with activity just days before now stood empty. Streets that had been filled with people were now silent and deserted. The Vortex had expected to find terrified civilians running in panic. Instead, they found ghost towns that seemed to be waiting for something. Supreme Hunter Sithik stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring down at the blue planet below. His yellow eyes glowed with anticipation as he gave the order his people had been waiting for. Begin the hunt. The first wave of Vortex fighters launched from the massive ships, sleek, deadly craft that moved like silver bullets through space. Each fighter was piloted by a young Vortex warrior eager to prove himself by killing humans. The aliens expected easy prey, defenseless targets that would die quickly. They were about to learn their first lesson about human Warfare pilot SCO Jin waited in her modified fighter hidden among the wreckage of an old space station. Her ship looked like junk from the outside, but under the damaged hull was the most advanced fighter Earth had ever built. She had been waiting for this moment for 6 months. The Vortec fighters approached Earth in perfect formation, following standard attack patterns that had worked on 47 other worlds. Their pilots were skilled and confident flying ships that were faster and more powerful than anything humans should have been able to build. Seojin smiled as she watched them approach. The aliens flew like they were putting on an air show, making no effort to hide their movements or protect themselves from ambush. They had never fought an enemy that refused to follow the rules. When the first group of fighters passed her position, SEO Jin activated her ship's hidden systems. The junk around her suddenly came alive, revealing itself as an advanced weapons platform. She fired a spread of missiles that had been disguised as space debris. The missiles struck 3 Vortec fighters before the aliens even knew they were under attack. The explosions lit up the darkness as the sophisticated alien ships were destroyed by weapons that should not have existed at all. Across Earth's orbital space, similar ambush were happening. Human fighters emerged from hiding spots among asteroids, old satellites, and space junk. The Vortex had expected to find a few primitive ships. Instead, they found a coordinated defense network that had been hidden for months, but the real surprise was waiting on Earth itself. The Vortec ground forces landed in major cities around the world, expecting to find millions of terrified humans. Instead, they found empty buildings and silent streets. The aliens spread out in hunting formations, moving through the abandoned cities like the predators they were. In New York, a squad of Vortec warriors entered what had been Times Square. Their heat sensors detected no life signs, their motion detectors showed no movement. The city was dead, but something felt wrong. That was when the buildings started shooting. Back engineer Bo Young had spent 8 months turning every major city on Earth into a giant weapons platform. Buildings that looked empty were actually automated gun positions. Streets that seemed abandoned were actually carefully designed kill zones. The Vortex found themselves trapped in a nightmare of crossfire and explosions. Every window could hide a weapon, every doorway could be a trap. The aliens were used to hunting prey that ran from them. Instead, they found themselves being hunted by the city itself. In London, a group of Vortec hunters entered the underground tunnel system, thinking they could use it to move unseen through the city. The tunnels were dark and quiet, perfect for an ambush, but the aliens were not the ones doing the ambushing. Lieutenant Harum and her team of human soldiers had been waiting in the tunnels for weeks. They knew every passage, every hiding spot, every escape route. The Vortex entered their territory, thinking they were the Predatorshurams. Team struck without warning, using the darkness and their knowledge of the tunnels to their advantage. The aliens found themselves lost in a maze of passages, being picked off one by enemies. They could not see the Vortex were skilled hunters, but they had always hunted on open ground where they could use their superior speed and strength. The confined spaces of the tunnels negated their advantages while giving every advantage to the humans. Similar battles were raging in subway systems, sewer tunnels, and underground bunkers around the world. The aliens had expected to dominate the surface of Earth. Instead, they found themselves fighting for their lives in the depths below. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Engineer Young Ho had been working on a secret project for months, turning the asteroid belt into the largest weapon system in human history. Rocks that had drifted through space for millions of years had been fitted with hidden engines and guidance systems. As the Vortec fleet tried to regroup from the unexpected resistance, Young Ho activated his masterpiece. Thousands of asteroids suddenly came alive, their hidden engines firing as they accelerated toward the alien ships. The Vortex saw what looked like a natural meteor shower heading toward them. Their sensors detected nothing unusual about the rocks until it was too late. The asteroids struck with the force of nuclear weapons, tearing through alien hulls and destroying entire sections of the fleet. Supreme Hunter Sithik watched in shock as his supposedly overwhelming force was torn apart by flying rocks. His perfect battle plan was falling apart, and he could not understand how these primitive humans had gotten the better of his warriors. The first day of the invasion ended with the Vortex in full retreat. They had lost nearly half their fleet and hundreds of their best Warriors, the humans had suffered casualties too, but they had achieved something no other species had ever done. They had made the galaxy's most feared predators afraid. As the alien ships pulled back to regroup, Sithik received reports from his surviving commanders. The humans were not fighting like any enemy they had ever encountered. They used tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They turned their own planet into a weapon. They fought with a desperation and cunning that shocked the battle-hardened aliens. For the first time in his life, Supreme Hunter Sithik felt something he had never experienced. Before uncertainty, he was beginning to understand that his people had not come to hunt helpless prey. They had walked into a trap set by the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The war was just beginning, and already the hunters were learning what it felt like to be hunted. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council meeting, and Earth had become a world transformed. General Sujin stood in the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching dozens of screens showing activity across the planet. The message from Ambassador Kang Ho had reached every government, every military base, and every major city within hours of his transmission. General was a small woman with short black hair and a scar running from her left ear to her chin. She had gotten that scar during the Third Korean War when she was just a lieutenant. Now, at 52 years old, she was the Supreme Commander of United Earth Defense Forces, a position that had never existed before the Vortex threat. Every screen in the command center showed the same thing: humanity preparing for war. In the Pacific Ocean, massive construction ships were building underwater cities that could house millions of people. The cities were designed to be invisible to orbital scans, hidden beneath thermal layers that would fool alien sensors. Admiral Ji Woo had designed these refuges after studying every piece of Vortex technology. Earth spies had managed to steal. The admiral was a tall man with graying hair who had spent 30 years in the Korean Navy before the world governments decided to pool their military resources. He knew more about naval warfare than anyone alive, and he had spent the last 3 months applying those lessons to space combat. On the screen showing North America, thousands of factories were working day and night. The factories that once made cars and computers now produced weapons and armor. Engineer Young Ho had revolutionized manufacturing by combining human industrial knowledge with stolen alien technology. Young Ho was a genius who had started building robots when he was 12 years old. He had 3 engineering degrees and patents for inventions that had changed the world. Twice over now, he was using all that knowledge to prepare for war. The weapons coming out of his factories looked like nothing Earth had ever seen before. In orbit around Earth, space stations that had once been research facilities were now weapons platforms. Captain Dae-yoon commanded the largest of these stations, a massive ring of metal and weapons that had been disguised as a simple mining operation. The Vortex thought it was harmless. The truth would surprise. Fem Da-yoon was the youngest person ever to command a space station. She was only 35, but she had been flying ships since she was 18. Her father had been a pilot. Her mother had been an engineer, and she had combined both skills to become the best space commander in human history. The most important work was happening in laboratories around the world. Dr. Min-soo led a team of scientists who were studying every piece of Vortex technology they could find. The aliens had been careless, leaving behind equipment and weapon fragments from their scouting missions. Dr. Min-soo had spent his whole life studying alien technology ever since the first contact with peaceful species 20 years ago. He was a small, quiet man who rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. His discoveries had already changed everything. Humans thought they knew about warfare. The equipment in his laboratory looked like something from a science fiction movie. Glowing screens showed alien writing that computers were slowly translating. Energy weapons that could melt steel were being taken apart and rebuilt. Advanced sensors that could detect ships from light years away were being studied and improved. But the most shocking discovery was about the Vortex themselves. The aliens had made a terrible mistake when they chose Earth as their target. They had studied human technology and military strength, but they had completely missed the most important thing about humanity, the thing that made them truly dangerous. "We have a problem," Minister Kim Jong said as he entered the laboratory. Minister Kim Jong was in charge of Earth's intelligence services. He was a man who knew secrets that could change the fate of nations, and right now he looked very worried. Dr. Minsu looked up from his work. What kind of problem? The kind that could save us all. The minister activated a holographic display showing Vortec military records. Our spies have been busy. The aliens keep detailed records of every species they have conquered and every battle they have fought, the display showed. World after world falling to Vortec invasion forces, the pattern was always the same. The aliens would arrive in overwhelming numbers, their enemies would fight bravely for a few weeks or months, then surrender when they realized they could not win. Every species they have defeated fought the same way. The minister continued traditional military tactics, organized armies, clear battle lines. They either won quickly or surrendered when defeat became obvious. Dr. Minsu studied the records with growing excitement. This is incredible. They have never faced guerrilla warfare. They have never fought an enemy that refuses to surrender. They have never encountered a species that gets stronger when backed into a corner. The minister smiled. It gets better. Every species they conquered had unified governments. When the leaders surrendered, the whole planet gave up, but Earth has over 200 separate nations. Even if some governments fall, others will keep fighting. This was the secret that would change everything. The Vortex were used to fighting honorable enemies who followed the rules of war. They had never encountered a species that would fight dirty, use every possible advantage, and never give up no matter how hopeless things looked. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, historian So Young was traveling from city to city giving speeches to anyone who would listen. Her job was to remind people of something very important. Humanity had faced extinction before and had always found a way to survive. So Young was a small woman with long black hair who had studied human history for 20 years. She knew every major battle, every great victory, and every time humans had turned certain defeat into impossible victory. Her speeches were making people remember who they really were. She stood in a packed stadium in Seoul, speaking to 50,000 people who had come to hear her words. The crowd was silent, listening to every word as she reminded them of their species' greatest moments. Our ancestors survived the ice ages when most life on Earth died out, she said in a voice that carried across the stadium. They built civilizations that lasted thousands of years. They explored every corner of our planet and then reached for the stars. The crowd began to cheer as she continued. They survived wars that killed millions. They survived diseases that should have ended our species. They survived disasters that destroyed entire cities, and they did it all without alien technology. Without energy weapons, without faster-than-light travel. She paused, letting the words sink. And they survived because they refused to give up, because they adapted to every challenge, because they learned from every defeat, because they were willing to do whatever it took to protect their families, their homes, their future. The cheering grew louder as people remembered what it meant to be human now. Aliens think we are weak because we fight among ourselves. They think we are stupid because we make mistakes. They think we are cowards because we sometimes retreat. But they do not understand that every fight makes us stronger. Every mistake teaches us something new. Every retreat is just preparation for the next attack. The stadium erupted in applause as So Young delivered her final message. The Vortex have made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They think they are hunting sheep, but they are about to discover they have cornered wolves, and when wolves are cornered, they do not run, they do not surrender. They fight with everything they have until either they win or their enemies are destroyed. Similar scenes were playing out in cities across the world. People were remembering what made humanity special. It was not their technology or their weapons. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to sacrifice everything for survival, and their ability to turn any setback into an advantage. The Vortex continued their preparations, confident in their superiority. Their intelligence reports painted humans as weak, divided primitives who would scatter at the first sign of real danger. They had no idea that every human on Earth now shared a single, unified purpose: survival at any cost. The calm before the storm was ending. Soon the real war would begin, and the galaxy would learn why you should never underestimate the deadliest species alive. The massive space station hung in the darkness like a metal city floating among the stars. Ambassador Kang Ho walked through the long corridors of the Galactic Council building. His black shoes made soft clicking sounds on the smooth floor. He wore his best blue uniform with the Earth flag patch on his shoulder. Today was going to be different from all the other boring meetings he had attended. The council chamber was huge, with seats arranged in a giant circle. Each alien species had their own section. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sweet that made his nose wrinkle. Kang Ho had been Earth's representative for 5 years now. He had seen many debates and arguments, but nothing like what was about to happen today. He took his seat in the small human section, only 12 chairs for Earth compared to the hundreds of seats for the older galactic civilizations. The Zephyrians, with their blue skin and 6 arms, filled an entire section. The crystal beings from Nexus Prime sparkled like living diamonds in another corner, but today all eyes were on the Vortex. The Vortex were the most feared species in the galaxy. They looked like giant lizards that had learned to walk on 2 legs. Their scales were dark green and black, with razor-sharp claws that could tear through steel. Their eyes glowed yellow in the dim light of the chamber. Each Vortex stood over 8 feet tall, with muscles that rippled under their thick hide. Supreme Hunter Sifik was their leader. He was the biggest and most dangerous of all the Vortex. His scales were darker than the others, and old battle scars covered his arms and face. A crown made from the bones of defeated enemies sat on his massive head. He had conquered 47 worlds and enslaved billions of beings across the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as the council speaker called for order. The speaker was an ancient being that looked like a floating jellyfish with tentacles that glowed different colors to show emotions. Right now, the tentacles were flashing red, which meant danger or anger. Supreme Hunter Sifik stood up slowly. His movement was smooth, like a predator getting ready to strike. He looked around the chamber with those burning yellow eyes, stopping to stare at each species for a few seconds. When his gaze fell on Kanho, the human felt a cold chill run down his spine. The Vortex leader's voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. When he spoke, the translator devices around the chamber made his words understandable to everyone, but the tone was still terrifying. Your attention, council members. I come before you today to announce my empire's next expansion. We have studied the Outer Rim territories and found a suitable world for our hunting grounds. A small blue planet called Earth in the Sol system. Murmurs filled the chamber. Several species turned to look at Kang Ho, who remained perfectly still in his chair. His face showed no emotion, but inside his heart was beating faster. The moment he had been dreading for years was finally happening. The planet is inhabited by a primitive species called human Sithic, continued with a cruel smile spreading across his reptilian face. Our scouts report that they have barely developed faster than light travel. Their weapons are crude, projectile-based systems. Their military organization is scattered and weak. They will provide excellent sport for our young hunters. An alien delegate from the Peaceful Coalition raised a tentacle. The coalition was known for trying to stop wars before they started. Your Supreme Hunter. Surely there are uninhabited worlds that would serve your purposes better. Why choose a world with intelligent life? Scythex laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Intelligence is a generous term for these creatures. They fight among themselves constantly over resources, territory, and beliefs. Their planet is divided into hundreds of small nations that cannot agree on anything. They have no unified government, no real space navy, and no experience with galactic warfare. The Vortex leader activated a holographic display showing images of Earth cities, forests, oceans, and most importantly, humans going about their daily lives. The images showed people walking to work, children playing in parks, farmers working in fields, normal, peaceful activities that had no idea their world was being watched by predators. Look at them scurrying about like insects, unaware of the eagle circling overhead. Sifik pointed at the images with one massive claw. They build their cities on the surface with no defensive barriers. They travel in small groups with no armed escorts. Their leaders meet in buildings that could be destroyed by a single orbital strike. More aliens in the chamber began to nod and whisper among themselves. The Vortex had never been wrong about their military assessments. They had conquered every world they had ever targeted. Their hunting expeditions always succeeded. We will give them one standard galactic year to evacuate their world, Sifik announced as if he was being generous. This will allow us to test their response and prepare our hunting grounds. Any who remain will become prey for our warriors. It will be a glorious hunt. The chamber erupted in excited chatter. Many species were already calculating how they could benefit from human defeat. The vortex always shared some of their conquered resources with their allies. Others were placing bets on how long the humans would last. Most guessed less than one local month. That was when Kanho finally stood up. The chamber became quiet again as all eyes turned to the small human in his simple blue uniform. He looked incredibly tiny compared to the massive aliens around him. His graying hair and lined face showed his age, but his eyes were steady and calm. He walked slowly to the center of the chamber where speakers were supposed to address the council. His steps echoed in the silence. Every alien in the room watched him with curiosity or amusement. The brave little human about to make his final plea. Supreme Hunter Sifik, I must respectfully warn you that you may want to reconsider this decision, Kang Ho said in a clear voice that carried across the chamber. Humans, do not surrender easily. The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. Zithek threw back his massive head and roared with laughter. The sound was so loud that several smaller aliens covered their ears. Other vortex joined in, slapping their claws against their chairs. The noise was deafening. Other species began laughing too, thinking the humans' warning was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Little man Sifik said when he could finally speak again, wiping tears from his yellow eyes. You speak of surrender as if you will have that option. When we hunt, we do not take prisoners. We do not negotiate with prey. Your species will learn what true fear means before the end. The laughter continued for several more minutes. Aliens pointed at Kang Ho and whispered jokes to each other. The human stood perfectly still, waiting for the noise to die down. His face showed no anger or fear, just a strange sadness. When the chamber finally became quiet again, Kang Ho spoke one more time. I have delivered my warning, Supreme Hunter. What happens next is your choice. He turned and walked back to his seat, the sound of his footsteps once again echoing in the silence. Behind him he could hear Sifik addressing the council again, making plans for the invasion, organizing the hunting parties, describing the glory that awaited his warriors. Kang Ho sat down and activated his personal communication device. His message was brief, but every human military commander on Earth would understand what it meant, the message that would change everything and wake up the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The message was simple. The hunt has begun. Prepare for total war. As the council session ended and aliens began filing out of the chamber, many of them glanced at the small human sitting alone in his section. Some felt pity for the doomed species. Others felt excitement about the coming entertainment. None of them understood that they had just witnessed the moment when humanity learned it was time to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. The vortex had made their choice. Now they would learn why that choice was the biggest mistake in galactic history.